All right, so our series has been fear versus faith. The theme is taken from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 23, where Jeremiah writes, "Great is your faithfulness." Today, we're looking at fear takes away hope, but faith rejoices in hope. All right, to our definitions. Faith. Come on, Anita.
I know it.
Fine, Anita.
Faith is the-
Anita. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ann.
Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the promise of things not seen.
Absolutely. Hebrews 11:1. Faith is absolute confidence that God will keep every promise. Fear, on the other hand, is defined as an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. We don't like fear. We don't like those things that make us afraid. Snakes. Okay, I'm just saying. But fear is an emotional and physiological response. I mean, it happens. Okay. Fear can have very negative physical and emotional impacts. I've been, looking at a lot of different articles online about fear and what different people have to say about it. That fear can interrupt our ability to think and regulate emotions. It impedes our ability to process information and prevents us from reflecting before acting. And again, that word acting is an important one. Fear impacts our thinking and decision-making in negative ways, leaving us susceptible to intense emotions and impulsive reactions. Fear causes action. And that's where, when God says something like 360 odd times, do not be afraid, what he's talking about is not, don't feel this. I'm convinced, because that's just, that's an emotion. We feel emotions. But what he's talking about, what I firmly believe that what God is commanding is, don't act based on that fear. Control how you act based on that fear. Joshua, and taking the place of Moses as leader, he's going to feel afraid. He's going to have some self-doubts. But what God tells him when he says, do not fear, and he says, because I am with you, that means you go ahead and do what you know you need to be doing. Regardless of how it actually feels at the time, you do what you know is right. So God is talking about what we do in response to that feeling, because the feeling isn't, an emotion isn't wrong. It's what we do with that. Okay, it's kind of like
Part of your physical.
exactly. It's physiological. It's part of us. It's kind of like love is not wrong until we do it the wrong way, right? Anger is not wrong until we do it the wrong way. God is a jealous God because he does it perfectly. Okay, it's our actions in response to our emotions that determine whether or not those things are right. And fear is kind of special in a way because it will place our needs above what God commands. It's kind of like, if I'm afraid to say something and stand up for what's right, then I'll just kind of slink back. And even though I know what I should be doing, and James 5 addresses that. If we know what we should be doing, we don't do it, that's sin. I mean, so it's not just a commission. It's kind of like a lie. You can lie by commission or by omission. Okay, and sin, you don't just sin by commission, by doing something. We can sin when we don't do something that we know is right. James makes that clear. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus commands his disciples 3 times, do not fear people who would insult, persecute, or even kill them. Now, when we look at our definition of fear, I mean, that just checks off all that's fear all the way down. It's kind of like, well, yeah, I should be afraid of these things. He's not telling them not to have the emotion, I'm convinced, but don't put their needs and their self-interest before God, before the commands of Jesus. He's saying, I'm sending you out to do these things. You do them because you're putting God first. Okay. Feelings, and it's amazing when we're doing what's right and we're doing what we know we should do, those emotions, they have less and less control. Okay. And again, where fear becomes wrong is our actions in response to fear. Although killing snakes is always right. I'm just saying. Good snakes. That's what. Anyway, that's what my niece says. Oh, but it's a good snake.
There's actually, my neighbor Dale said, We don't kill that snake because it's eating that snake.
Yeah, okay, well,
I hope I don't
maybe.
take up too much time, but I
Go
gotta
ahead.
tell you a funny joke, not joke, a story. My mom was over at the neighbor's house one day and this little snake slippers up. And my mom looks at it and she goes, "Oh, that's a good snake." And then as she's saying that, the neighbor is taking a hoe and going, "It is now. That's a good snake."
And now. I have a long history with snakes. My mom told me that when I was in my little high top shoes at 2 years old, we lived in Abilene. She warned me about snakes. And she hears me yelling, "Snake, mommy, snake," on the front porch. And I am stomping a big fat earthworm to death in my little high top baby shoes. I don't remember this. That may be a mom story, but yeah. So I have a long history with, anyway.
I got it off topic, and I just.
But again, go ahead.
One time I found a slug in her kids.
Oh, no.
Oh,
no. No. That's, all right, this is just getting worse. It's going to, anyway. But as Christians, we must be in control of our responses to fear so that we continue following Christ no matter how scary the circumstance. That's where we don't fear. I mean, that's where we control that initial response. And it's amazing that when we do the right thing, even though it's kind of scary, we're less and less afraid as we're doing it. It's amazing. I mean, how God planned that or figured that out. All right.
Kathy?
Yeah.
Kathy,
One second. Yeah.
Physical.
Right. Yes, Ann.
am I getting ahead of you when I say perfect love cast out fear?
I bet you are.
Okay. I bet you
No,
know where to find it.
But that's a very good point. 1 John 5, I believe, is where the perfect love casts out fear. But again, actually, that's a slightly different take than I was going on, but it's very good. All right, so fear takes away hope. Fear, I mean, when we let fear take over, it has a lot of, I mean, the more I read, even just, different doctors and all that kind of stuff, the negative effect of fear, it's intense on our lives. But faith, so fear takes away hope, but faith rejoices in hope. How many watch the news? And it's a bad idea every time I do it. I know. But we seem to be living in this post-truth age where feelings are reality. There's no absolute truth. I mean, people are willing to hurt you if they disagree with you. It's amazing. There was an article I read yesterday, and it's kind of like, why? But this trans activist said recently that women who don't agree with the trans and support the trans agenda should be punched in the face. I mean, this is a guy in a dress who says that if you don't support me and say, yes, come into the bathroom where I, should feel safe, a women's only bathroom, I'm going to punch you in the face. It's kind of like, are you kidding me? Right. We're the.
I believe he's more male than female.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
David's article.
Yeah. But again, there's a violent response to just actual truth. I mean, reality. Anyone else concerned about how free speech and religious liberties are under attack, even in this country? There's a judge up for one of the circuit courts who during the pandemic was completely, against every single religious freedom, wanted to shut. I mean, she's on record for doing these things, for saying that, protesting is okay, but meeting in a parking lot for church is not. I mean, she went to court and suing people, lost every time, has lost several religious liberty before the Supreme Court, 9-0. I mean, where everyone on the Supreme Court disagreed with her position, and she's up for a judgeship, and yeah, so far. Not to mention extreme religious persecution in other parts of the world. China is a big one, and it's not just Christians. They're persecuting everybody and just exterminating them.
Have you heard they're trying to rewrite the Bible?
You just cribbed my notes, man. Y'all are good. That they are on, the CCP is currently in a 10-year process to rewrite the Bible to align with the Communist Party. The Communist, yeah. It has been reported, and I read this on Monday, that John chapter 7, where the woman caught in adultery is brought before Jesus and he shows her mercy. Okay, that's what's written. It's been reported. Now, I have absolutely no way of verifying this personally, but it's been reported that it's being rewritten to show Jesus, instead of showing mercy, he stones the woman himself. All, to bring the Bible in line with the CCP, with communist doctrine. And this is what people, I mean, I heard some, probably 15 years ago that the next generation, we all saw Tiananmen Square when, the tanks rolled in and the people were protesting and all this kind of stuff. That has been wiped out from the Chinese mind in one generation because they absolutely crushed that information. So this is real scary stuff. When they say they're rewriting the Bible, it's kind of, it's not, oh, haha, they are doing this for any Christian that lives in China. And that is what's going to be reality for them. Not to mention concerns over rising prices, increase in crime, weakened military, out of control national debt. It's frightening to know that my kids are growing up in this world that seems to have gone insane in a very short amount of time. And these are very real concerns and pressures in life, and they don't seem to have any answers. And it's very easy if you start, watch too much news, read too many articles, it's very easy for fear to lead to hopelessness. One quote I read online, and I'm kind of like, are you kidding? This is, period, full stop after you make this statement. But this is a statement here. Feeling hopeless may be a natural, universal response to personal and world events that impact our lives. Full stop, no answer. And I'm kind of like, are you kidding me? It's kind of like, oh no, you're just going to feel hopeless. Really? There's no answer there. That it's not an answer. There's no hope there, and there's no solution. I'm going to make an absolute statement that there is no answer to hopelessness outside of God. Okay, that God is the only reason that we have hope. And it boggles my mind because I know people who have walked away from God, having known God, having experienced his forgiveness and his faithfulness, walk away from God. And it's kind of like, how do you even continue to exist? Because you are existing without hope. Your life sure didn't get better, because I'm looking at it from here, and 10 years later, it didn't get better. It's without hope, because God is our only
Like
source
the
of hope.
scripture says, if in this life you have hope, you're all men most miserable.
Well, if we don't have hope, if we don't have hope of that eternity, then we are miserable. Yeah,
Kathy,
right. Yes, ma'am.
I believe the Bible teaches that these things are going to happen.
Oh yeah,
And
they've always happened. And then see, that's the thing.
and,
when you look
and
at
it's going to
that-
get worse.
Oh yeah.
It's going
It's-
to get worse before
yeah.
the Lord's comes.
Oh yeah. But then, if you look back when Jesus lived, and you look at the Roman Empire at that time, if you read anything about that history, it was worse than anything we have right now. It's so, yeah. But again, so things are the same. It just seems like things go in kind of cycles of what's really bad. This pops up really bad. And it does. So what I'm going to do today, I don't want to get too mired into hopelessness, because everybody's kind of looking, so I brought you there. Sorry. But I want to get onto the hopefulness. Yeah, getting onto that. First, I want to give 3 examples of God's people who were overwhelmed by fear and hopelessness. And then we're going to see how their faithful response led to rejoicing in hope. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. I want to go through all 3 of them and where they were, and then I want to get to the solution. Okay, so I want to do the three verses and then the chorus. Okay, so if y'all get ahead of me, I'll call you out on it. Okay, so no solution yet. All right. Point 1, hopelessness leads to depression, anxiety, and loss of motivation. We're going to look at Naomi. I know everybody studies Ruth, but we're going to look at Naomi. Turn to Ruth chapter 1. Oh, where'd it go? Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Skip right over it. This little bitty Bible. Okay. I borrowed Sam's Bible because mine is falling apart. That's my excuse. All right. Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, and then verse 3 to 5, please.
Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Then Amalek, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Oprah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilon also died. So the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband.
Okay,
Her name was Orpha.
Orpha,
Mama
Yeah.
made a mistake when she spelled her name on her birth certificate.
all right.
Orpha.
So Naomi is in a foreign land, bereft of her husband and both sons. I can't imagine how devastating that was. Realize at this time, there's no social security. You depended on your children to take care of you in your old age. That's just how it worked, okay? And not to mention that she had just lost everybody and she's in this foreign land. I can't imagine how devastating that must have been, but we can read how she responded. If you drop down to verse 13, Naomi told her daughters-in-law that the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Imagine being so down, so overwhelmed that you believe that God has worked against you. I mean, that's depression. That is some pretty deep depression. And I'm not going to blame her for feeling that way when these things have happened to her. Okay. Again, this is a feeling. Okay. God does not, I don't believe that God condemns feelings. What do we do with those? I mean, does she stay there? Okay, now I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm not letting y'all get ahead of me. So, all right. And now, and then they travel back. Ruth insists on going with her. They travel back to Bethlehem. Naomi is recognized when she and Ruth return, and people have questions, of course. It's kind of like, hey, where you been? What happened? All this kind of stuff. And Naomi responds in verse 20 and 21.
But she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me?
Thank you. All right. She is devastated. I mean, she doesn't even seem to have the strength to worry about her future, because when you see it's Ruth who goes out and, starts getting food and all this kind of stuff, Naomi is just done. Her life has changed from pleasant to bitter, and she is too broken to bother even trying to hide it. I mean, most of the time we put on a mask. Oh yeah, I'm fine. All this kind of stuff. She's kind of like, nope. She's hurting too much to even try to hide it. I doubt she got a whole lot of questions after she gave that response, but it's kind of like, okay. But that is where she is in chapter 1. Okay. Any comments about where she is here in chapter 1? I mean, she is so devastated. I can't. Miserable. Absolutely. When she
had no hope.
No hope. Absolutely. Yes.
That's just like her name actually means pleasant and
Yep.
gentle.
Yep. So she went from pleasant and then said, no, call me bitter, because that's where I am now. All right. Second point, our circumstances can feel so hopeless that we can lose sight of God and his promises. Turn to 1 Kings chapter 19, and we're going to look at Elijah.
Give me a second to get there.
1 Kings.
You just have it.
I'm convinced things are just in the wrong place in Sam's Bible. This chapter should be on the left side. Anyway, all right. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 3-4, please.
And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die, and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father.
Thank you. All right. Elijah's life has been threatened. The queen says, I'm going to kill you. She has the power to do that. She has the legal power. She has the army power. She can do that. And so Elijah runs for his life. And he is overwhelmed with fear and hopelessness. He decides that he doesn't even want his servant with him. It's kind of like, okay, I don't even feel like being around anybody. So he leaves his servant behind, and twice in verses 10 and 14 of this chapter, he tells God, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of armies. For the sons of Israel have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they have sought to take my life. He's done. He tells God in verse 3 and 4, just go ahead and let me die. I am done. I mean, you've got to be pretty depressed and pretty hopeless to get to that point. You've got to really have lost sight of, God has a plan, God is in control, all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like, nope, I'm just done. We're going to look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah had it really rough. He preached for some 40 years. The response to that preaching was being beaten, thrown in and out of prison. He was thrown in a muddy pit at one point, and the guards went to the king and said, hey, he's going to starve to death down there. I mean, he had a really rough time. And what he was doing was warning Judah, God's about to punish. I mean, because, the Babylons were right there and God was about to use them. 40 years trying to warn Judah and seeing no effect. That's disappointing. And that it's about to happen. I mean, in fact, Jeremiah chapter 39 records that Jeremiah was in prison for preaching God's warning when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. And it's just kind of like, okay, he said for 40 years it's going to happen, and here it's happened. And after the fall of Jerusalem, Jeremiah wrote in the book of Lamentations, he starts chapter 3 by writing, I am a man who has seen misery. And he goes on to describe that misery. And in verse 18, he writes, my strength has failed, and so has my hope from the Lord. I mean, just imagine, you've seen Jerusalem, the city, everything, just you're in prison. And then when you come out of prison, you just see everything destroyed. Just like God told you it would happen, and it's happened. I mean, just the devastation of that. And that's why he wrote Lamentations. It was a series of poems in response to that destruction. Both of these men were overcome by fear and hopelessness. Any comments before we get into the good stuff, into the brighter side? Okay. All right, hurrying up here. So there are many more examples in the Bible of people who were overwhelmed by the hopelessness of their circumstances. We've got Job, Moses, Hannah, Jonah. I mean, Hannah, who was just kind of like so miserable because of what she needed. But faith rejoices in hope. And we're going to see three ways that God provides hope. Okay, because again, I'm convinced that we're given these examples because our lives get to the point at different times that they're just overwhelming. And I'm firmly convinced that it's a tool of the devil to convince us, because our lives are a series of peaks and valleys, up and down. Okay, and I'm convinced it's a tool of the devil that when we're in one of those valleys, to try to convince us it's always going to be a valley. Things will never get better. There's no hope. I mean, I'm just convinced that this is how it's always going to be. There's nothing else. And I'm just convinced that the devil uses those low points to try to keep us there. But first thing that we can know is that God blesses us with godly relationships to help and sustain us. Ruth chapter 2. Okay, we all know the story. Ruth, starts going out and she's going to support them. She's going to take care of things. She's taking, she insisted on going with her mother-in-law back to Bethlehem in the first place instead of going back to her family. So she is now the stranger in a strange land with no husband and no children. Okay. But Ruth took care of Naomi, and over time, it says from the beginning of barley harvest to don't know how long they were there before then, but barley harvest to wheat harvest is about 3 months or so. So, Naomi is taking some time to be just really depressed. Okay. But over time, Naomi, being the person that she was, started thinking about how she could provide for Ruth's future. She kind of got out of her own self. I mean, because that's the worst thing about depression, is that you kind of close up and all you think about is yourself. And it just kind of builds on itself. But if you can break out of that and look past and see, what's some need around me. And that's what Naomi did. Naomi, being the person that she was, looked up from her own hurts and said, wait a minute, Ruth is here. I can do something to help Ruth. And she can start seeing past where she is in her discouragement and her depression, and start looking for ways to help Ruth. And she does that. I mean, and we see the result in Ruth chapter 4. Let's go ahead and run back there since I actually found it. Ruth chapter 4, verse 31 to 35. I don't know who has that.
About 13 to
13 to 15.
Oh, what did I do?
No, 30.
Oh, I beg, I'm looking over here at Matthew. Thank you.
Okay.
Ruth chapter 4, verse 13 to 15, please.
So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife, and when he went in to her, the Lord gave her conception and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel, and may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him.
Okay. And again, I mean, it didn't take away Naomi's hurt, okay, that she had lost her husband, lost her sons, but that relationship that God provided her was a blessing that sustained her and brought her out of that. And she was able, now this was the decision she had to make. She was able to look past her own hurts and kind of get back out and into living again. But God provides us with godly relationships to help and sustain us. And actually, Ruth's son was Obed. He was the father of Jesse, father of David. Okay, so when they said, may he be famous, it's kind of like, yeah, you don't get much more famous than that. All right, but God provides us with godly relationships to help and sustain us. Let's turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans 12, verses 10 to 13.
Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, and honor, giving preference to one another, not lacking in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality.
Okay, so again, this is the relationship that God blesses us with in having a church family. That I have noticed in my own life that I've had some really good friends that weren't Christians, and it always seems that we get to a point, and that's the limit of our friendship. But the friendship that we have, the relationships that we can have with one another, I mean, those are a blessing from God, and they can help us and sustain us, and God provides that for us. And that's a purpose. I mean, when Paul is writing, I mean, he had his son Timothy in the faith. I mean, he had, all these things, and they relied on each other. And God provides that. Any comments on that first one, where that God provides hope? Because when it's Ecclesiastes 4, where it says, 2 are better than 1. If one falls down, the other one can help him up. But woe be to the one who falls down, there's no one to help him up. When we are with our Christian family, if we stumble, take a tumble, or anything like that, or we're just hurting, there's someone else to help us up. That's the whole purpose of it, of our Christian family. Now, it should go both ways. It should always go both ways. We can't always be the one giving. We can't always be the one taking, but God provides that. And we see the result, and we can see how good that result can be, because we have the example of Ruth and Naomi. Any comments about
I
that?
was very blessed to be able to help others as Ruth helped
Mhm.
Naomi. She was certainly blessed.
Yes. And it goes both ways. Like I said,
Right.
there are times, even in a marriage relationship, there are times that, I'm discouraged, or times Sam's discouraged. And if we're, usually, and this is why it works, one of us is doing better, and we can help the other one. And that's the same way we can do in our Christian relationships, that one of us, there is someone who's doing better than I am right now if I'm not doing well, And and that person, God provides those relationships to help pull us back up. All right, number 2, God knows what we need and is able to provide for us. All right, going back to Elijah, depressed, ready to die. He's just, he's left his servant behind. He's wandered off into the wilderness a few days and he's just sat down. It's kind of like, okay, I'm done. But God still had work for Elijah to do. But what's the first thing that God did? Did God just instantly say, Elijah, get up and go to work? No.
He met his need.
Yes, let's turn back to 1 Kings 19, verses 5 to 7.
Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake, baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. But the angel of the Lord came back the second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, and so God can provide for our, and I'm not saying that God's going to, magically, here's dinner. That's not how it works now. But God is able to provide for our needs. Yeah, it'd be nice sometimes at 5 o'clock. It's kind of, oh man, what's for dinner? And it just, but again, God is able to provide for us. And for Elijah was discouraged. He was depressed to the point that he was just kind of like, I'm ready to die. I mean, that's seriously depressed and hopeless. He gave Elijah some time and space. Okay. Paul did the same thing. I think it was it 3 years that before Paul got into his ministry after he was converted, that he just had that time to figure things out. And so God gives Elijah time and space to recuperate and refocus. Okay. He feeds him, he sends him to Mount Horeb where he spends some time and with God there. And then, and he also gave Elijah hope. In 1 Kings 19:18, God assured Elijah that there were 7,000 who had not bowed down to Baal. They were, of course, in hiding because, it's, hide or die, but there were 7,000 who had not bowed down before an idol of Baal. God knows what we need, and he is able to provide for us. Go ahead.
I was reading on the next verse, number 8. In 1 Kings 19, and I was just wondering what was in that cake, because
I know.
He was strong enough to travel for 40 days and 40 nights.
Well, this is also the same guy that God had just given the strength to outrun a horse-drawn chariot. So, God was with Elijah. Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and turn to Matthew 6 and read verses 31 and 33.
Therefore, do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of his righteousness, and all these things shall be yours as well.
Thank you. All right. 1 Timothy 6:8. Unfortunately, what God thinks we need, or what Paul says we need in 1 Timothy 6:8 is food and clothing. I want a little bit more than that. But again, God knows what we need. He is able to provide for us. And he cares for us. We have so much more than what we need. Because again, Paul says we need food and we need clothes. Okay. But God provides so much more for us. We've got air conditioning. Oh man.
Apparently, we don't have to have air conditioning. Many people live before us.
I know it.
But it sure seems like.
Moving here is the first time I've ever had air conditioning since I got married. So in 35 years, so it's like you can do without it. It's a lot nicer to have it.
Preston said when he said his prayer Sunday night, I think he said, I hope people didn't think that was weird when I said that.
No.
He
That's
said
a,
that God is-
it is a blessing. It really is.
And Europe normally doesn't get so hot, so a lot of places overseas do not have air conditioning, and they
Yeah.
have the hottest summer on record over there, like in Greece and stuff.
They have their time.
But again, it's kind of like, when I lived in New York, most of the time you didn't need it. There was about 3 weeks where you really wanted it. But other than that, so it wasn't so long that you actually went and got it. But again, God knows what we need, and he is able to provide that. But he blesses us with so much more. I mean, I don't just have clothes, I have nice clothes. I mean, I don't just have food, I have pretty much, you can tell, an overabundance of food.
Chocolate chips.
Yes, plenty of chocolate chips. There are lots of chocolate chips. So again, God blesses us, and he wants to bless us. I think it's Malachi 3 where it says that, where God says, test me and see if I won't just pour out blessings from heaven. And what he's responding to, it's kind of a conversation back and forth with Israel, because Israel's kind of like, God's not blessing me, so I'm not going to do anything for God. And God's kind of like, be obedient, do what I tell you to, and see if you won't be blessed to an extent that you just, that's just overflowing. And we are so blessed by God, because God knows what we need, and he is able to provide it. All right. Any comments as we're going on? Because now we're going to get to the hard one, because we can know that God is in control no matter what. Sometimes our circumstances don't change the way we want them to. Some things we can pray fervently about, and it doesn't work out the way we would like. But regardless of our circumstances, we can know for certain that God is in control and will give us strength that we need to endure.
Most of the time, though, we're being thankful that it didn't, because God.
Oh,
did
I know
what
it.
was best.
Yeah. And if you kind of look back on things, it's kind of like, wow, that would have been a bad idea. But again, let's look back at Jeremiah. Jeremiah, his circumstances didn't change. Okay. He was in jail. He comes out, and here's the destruction. I mean, just picture that. You go into jail. Jerusalem is being attacked by Babylon, but it's still there. You come out, the walls are knocked down, the houses are burned, the temple is just, razed to the ground. That's where Jeremiah is right now. And no amount of praying is going to instantly change that, because also God has also said 70 years before Jerusalem is rebuilt. Jeremiah is not going to see it. Okay. His circumstances aren't going to change the way that he would like. Jerusalem isn't going to be instantly rebuilt. So it's not going to be what he might like. And again, he lived with fear and hopelessness for 40 years trying to preach punishment is coming if you don't straighten up. And his circumstances didn't change. Every time he said that, someone either smacked him or beat him or threw him in prison, threw him in a pit. Those circumstances didn't change. Okay. And so we get to seeing Jeremiah at his lowest point, writing in Lamentations chapter 3, I am a man who has seen misery. He truly did. Okay. And Lamentations 3 verse 18, he says, my strength has failed, and so has my hope in the Lord. But, okay, those are his physical circumstances. Weak moment, that's how he feels. That's what his circumstances are. That's how he feels. But now we're going to see what he truly believes in the following verses. Let's go ahead and turn to Lamentations chapter 3. It's right after Jeremiah. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations. Oh, it actually was in the right spot here. All right. In Lamentations chapter 3, starting in verse 21, this will actually start being very familiar pretty quickly, what he writes here. This I recall to mind, therefore I have hope. He's in a hopeless situation. What do you mean you have hope? He has hope. Though through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I hope in him.
Page number 230.
I know. If anybody can read that without getting goosebumps, or sing that song knowing the history behind it without getting goosebumps, I mean, I dare you. But again, yes.
In 20, which is, it's still, but it says my soul still remembers.
Yes, you're right. But again, because he can remember what God has done, because of what he knows of God, because he had all this history. Now we have all of this history to look ourselves. We have the end of the story.
And it's good to remember.
It is good to
what you've
remember.
gone through
Yes.
and what God has done.
I had a friend who kept a prayer journal, which I was never good enough to do that, but he would actually flip back a few pages ever so often.
When you feel this way.
Right.
turn
When he
here.
was kind of like, when he was heading into the next really hard thing, he would flip back and say, okay, this is how God answered my prayers before. It was, maybe it wasn't yes, maybe it was no, but things turned out right because God is in control. But again, he remembered. He says, this I recall to mind. Okay. Therefore, I hope in him. And in the Bible, we have the history of God keeping every promise he has ever made. And so we can know for certain that God will keep the promises he has made to us through Jesus. We can know that God is in control. Absolutely. I know it. When everything around us just seems to be absolute chaos, God is in control. I picture God in creation. When I read Genesis chapter 1, I picture God just kind of, oh, here's the sun. I'm just going to put it right there. Oh, here's the earth. I'm just moving things around like marbles. I mean, that's what I picture, the power of God moving things around. I mean, just, and that just kind of, a picture in my mind. But again, the power of God, so absolute, so completely in control. And I want to go ahead and read First Chronicles. So turn back toward the beginning here. First Chronicles chapter 29 and verses 11 to 13, please.
Thine, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and all the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and in the earth is thine. Thine is the kingdom, O Lord, and thou art exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from thee, and thou rulest over all. In thy hand are power and might, and in thy hand it is to make great and to make strength to all. And now we thank thee, our God, and praise thy glorious name.
Thank you. Again, we can know God is in control. And these are words of David. I mean, the king, recognizing that God is the one who gives power. God is the one who gives strength. We can know God is in control. Any comments before we're finishing up here? Okay. This world is a fearful place. There are many frightening circumstances that would try to overwhelm us and take away our hope. But God provides us with Christian family to depend on and care for. God knows what we need, and he provides us abundantly beyond what we need. I mean, I thank God every day for air conditioning. It's, and we are blessed. I mean, I carry my Bible around like this. I mean, it's right here. And we are blessed with instant access to God's word so that we can study and know for ourselves that God is in control no matter what happens or what is happening in my life. I can know for a fact. And really we need to spend time doing that, going back over and reading the history. That's why it's there, so that we can know God is in control, so that we can know that God gives strength, that we can know God loves us and keeps every promise, because we have that every single time. Not one of his promises has ever failed. I want to finish with Romans chapter 15, verse 13. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace in your faith, and that by the power of the Holy Spirit, your whole life and outlook may be radiant with hope. Thank you so much for your time and for your comments.
Very good.